Reading 19 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teachings of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 1. Birdlips, September 21st, 1941. The Idea of Transformation in the Work, Part 4, Section 2. Last time a paper was read about the necessity of not taking everything as I in oneself. You have heard it said before that unless a man divides himself into two, he cannot shift from where he is. This saying, often used in the work, refers to the beginning of the process of what is called inner separation. A man must first divide himself into two. But the further stages of inner separation are more complex than this. Let me give you an example. It was recently said to me by someone that he had begun to see what self-observation and separation meant for the first time. He said, "I have always been taking negative emotions as a nasty bit of myself. I realized my mistake." Self-observation will show us our negative states, but something further is, as a rule, necessary than mere observation of them, and that is inner separation. And no one can separate himself from anything he observes in himself if he regards what he observes as being himself, for then inevitably the feeling of I will pass into what he observes in himself, and this feeling of I will increase the strength and power of what he observes. He has to learn to say in the right way, "This is not me, not I." Now, if he takes his negative emotions as a nasty bit of himself, he will not be able to separate himself from them. Do you see why? He will not be able to separate himself from them because he is taking them as himself, and so giving them the validity of I. And as was said in the last talk, if we give to everything in ourselves the feeling of I, if we say I to everything we think or feel or say or imagine, nothing can alter. For I cannot alter I. And if we practice self-observation on this basis, everything we observe will be I. Whereas the case really is that everything in us, practically speaking, is it. That is, a machine going by itself. Instead of saying, "I think," we should realize it would be far nearer the truth if we said, "It thinks." And instead of saying, "I feel," it would be nearer the mark to say, "It feels." What we call ourselves, what we say I to, is actually an immense world, larger and more varied than the outer world we behold through our external senses. We do not say I to what we see in the outer world, but we say I to everything that takes place in our inner world. This mistake takes many years even to modify a little. But sometimes we are given the clear light of understanding for a moment, and we realize what it means and what the work is continually telling us. If a man ascribes evil to himself, he is in the wrong position in regard to it, just as if he ascribes good to himself and the merit of it. Every kind of thought can enter your mind. Every kind of feeling can enter your heart. But if you ascribe them to yourself and say I to all of them, you fasten them to you and cannot separate internally from them. One can avoid negative thoughts and feelings if one does not take them as oneself, as I. But if one takes them as I, one combines with them. That is, one identifies oneself with them. And then one cannot avoid them. There are inner states within us all, that we must avoid just as one avoids walking into mud in the external visible world. One must not listen to them, must not go with them, must not touch them or let them touch you. This is inner separation. But you cannot practice inner separation if you ascribe everything that takes place in your inner invisible life, where you really all live, to yourself. I have often been struck by people asking me about themselves in regard to thoughts that plague and worry them. For example, people who pride themselves on being what is called clean-minded often find themselves tortured by indecent thoughts and images. This is exactly what happens if a person insists on thinking that everything in him or her is I. In this connection, I remember that after we left the Institute in France, we went to Scotland, to my grandfather's house. He had collected an immense library, among which were a great many theological and moral volumes. They were, of course, entirely formatory, but having nothing else to read, I spent some of the long winter evenings there in trying to understand what they were about. There were the usual endless, acrimonious arguments about the nature of the Trinity, the nature of heresy, and so on. But I noticed that one subject of debate that often came up was whether we are responsible for our thoughts. Some of the most severe moralists insisted that we were, but a few of these, now long dead theologians, took the point of view that we were not. Some said that the devil sent us our thoughts. But no one of those writers whom I read took a psychological view of this question. At any moment, the strangest thoughts and images can enter us. If we say I to them, if we think that we thought them, they have power over us. And if we then try to eliminate them, we find it impossible. Why? I will repeat one of my own illustrations of this situation. Suppose you are standing on a plank and trying to lift it, and struggling as hard as you can to do so. Will you succeed? No, because you yourself are trying to lift yourself, and this is impossible. It requires a considerable reorientation of one's whole conception of oneself to be able to realize what all this means. So, many buffers and forms of pride and stupid ways of thinking prevent us from seeing what the situation within us is really like. We imagine we are in control of ourselves. We imagine we are conscious and always know what we are thinking and saying and doing. We imagine we are a unity and that we have a real permanent I, and so have will, and we imagine many other things besides. All this stands in our way, and before we can practice inner separation, a quite new feeling about oneself and about what one really is necessary.